The Ranger's descent into the abyssal trench was, for Martha King, a pilgrimage into the very heart of the earth's crushing, primordial memory, and with each fathom gained, a new dread did bloom within her breast. The thick viewport, a marvel of human engineering, offered naught but an ever-deepening indigo, swiftly yielding to an ultimate, lightless black that swallowed the very notion of distance. Below the pressure hull, the faint hum of the thrusters felt like a heartbeat against a colossal silent void, a fragile assertion of life against an antiquity, so profound it mocked the very concept of time. Martha, a woman whose life had been spent plumbing the ocean's obscurest corners, had never felt so utterly insignificant, so utterly exposed to an ancient malevolent patience. Her fingers, despite the cabin's climate control, felt the chill of the deep through the very air, a premonition of the grave. Beside her console, a sleek obsidian cat, her sole companion, Cicero twitched an ear, its luminous green eyes reflecting the faint glow of the instrument panels, an odd watchful sentry against the encroaching nothingness. The depth gauges ticked past the 7,000-meter mark, a region where the known biological world thinned to a whisper, replaced by forms so alien they defied terrestrial taxonomy. It was here, amidst the crushing weight equivalent to 1,100 atmospheres, that the first anomaly did manifest itself, a subtle tremor, not of the Ranger's own systems, but an external vibration that resonated through the very water, a bass note of immense, unseen power. It was fleeting, a mere ghost of a vibration, yet Cicero hissed, his back arching almost imperceptibly, his tail lashing once, sharp and quick. Martha's gaze darted to the sonar, a web of green lines on a black screen, which for 48 hours had shown nothing but the irregular contours of the trench walls. Now, a faint, vast echo blossomed at the very edge of the Ranger's long range sweep. A colossal, indistinct mass that did not conform to any known geological feature. It was too vast, too regular in its irregularity, and it was by some unholy means moving. A new, more potent wave of cold seemed to emanate from the viewport, permeating the cabin despite the active heaters. The single external floodlight, a potent beam designed to pierce kilometers of dark, began to flicker, momentarily plunging the forward view into absolute darkness before reasserting its frail dominion over the gloom. In one such flicker, as the light reasserted itself, Martha saw it. A form vast and indistinct that drifted past the very edge of the Ranger's illuminated cone. It was not a leviathan of flesh, nor a geological formation, but something else entirely fully a structure, perhaps, though one fashioned from no known material. It was colossal, seemingly without end, and parts of it appeared undeniably thoroughly decayed, adorned with growths that were not barnacles, but something far more grotesque, like ancient, petrified fungal blooms. A palpable sense of wrongness, a profound violation of natural law, emanated from its silent passage, causing Cicero to let out a low, guttural growl, his hackles now fully raised, his green eyes fixed on the unholy darkness beyond the glass. The Ranger, now truly a speck in an unthinkable abyss, seemed to be drifting not towards discovery, but towards an ancient, forgotten horror. The colossal, darkened mass, a silent, drifting continent of abomination, continued its ponderous transit, its impossible bulk eclipsing even the Ranger's powerful, if now faltering, floodlight. Martha King, her breath caught somewhere betwixt her throat and breast, watched with an awful fascination as the light, after its fitful dance, settled into a dim, sickly glow, revealing the merest slivers of the passing horror. It was not merely vast, but possessed of an architecture so utterly alien, so profoundly twin-wrong, that her mind recoiled from any attempt at terrestrial comparison. Great, eroded buttresses, like the ribs of some impossible beast, jutted from its surface, festooned with growths that were not of this earth, nor perhaps of any living realm. They pulsed with a faint, unholy luminescence, a pallid green that briefly illumined cavities and rents in the structure's surface, like wounds upon some ancient, suffering god. Cicero, a creature of instinct and shadow, continued his low, rumbling growl, a sound vibrating deep within his chest, a primal warning against a threat beyond human comprehension. His hackles remained erect. His emerald eyes, usually so placid, now wide and black-pupilled, with an animalistic terror that chilled Martha more than the encroaching cold. Driven by a morbid compulsion, a desperate need to comprehend the incomprehensible, Martha initiated a slow, cautious maneuver, attempting to bring the Ranger parallel to the behemoth's flank. The thrusters strained, their hum a frantic counterpoint to the abyssal silence, as the submersible fought against an unseen current, or perhaps an unholy influence emanating from the structure itself that sought to draw them closer. As they edged forward, the true horror of its scale became sickeningly apparent. The growths, which had seemed like fungal blooms, were in fact immense, sessile organisms, their surfaces a mottled tapestry of ochre and grey, resembling nothing so much as putrefied flesh stretched taut over a skeletal frame. And within the deepest fissures, where the pallid light could not fully penetrate, Martha caught glimpses of movement, of things that writhed and squirmed within the structure's very fabric like parasites within a dying host. A guttural moan, thin and distant, seemingly from the very water itself, vibrated through the hull, a sound of profound anguish, or perhaps a low, hungry growl. The Ranger's systems began to falter. Alarms, mercifully silent until now, chimed with an insistent, metallic urgency. The sonar, which had shown the vast, indistinct mass, now displayed an impossible cacophony of readings, a maelstrom of phantom echoes that danced and shimmered across the screen, utterly baffling the sophisticated sensors. The internal temperature plummeted, and a fine, icy mist began to coalesce upon the viewport, obscuring the view of the nightmare outside. Cicero, abandoning his post by the console, now paced frantically across the small cabin, his tail lashing, his growls escalating into frantic, distressed meows, as if sensing an imminent, inescapable doom. Martha, her hands trembling on the controls, fought against the Ranger's increasingly sluggish responses, the vessel feeling less like a machine of exploration and more like a helpless fly caught in some monstrous, ancient web. The thing outside, vast and blighted, was not merely passing. It was drawing them in, its unimaginable mass exerting a gravitational pull, a monstrous, silent invitation into its own unholy, lightless depths. The Ranger, once a bastion of human ingenuity against the crushing dark, now became a mere captive, drawn inexorably towards the colossal, blasphemous mass that loomed before them. The subtle pull had escalated into a relentless tow, the submersible's thrusters, despite Martha's frantic adjustments, now mere impotent tremors against an unseen titanic current that bore them onwards. The vessel groaned, a sound of metallic anguish, as if its very structure recoiled from the approaching horror. Outside, the few remaining floodlights sputtered, casting elongated, dancing shadows that lent the already grotesque architecture of the behemoth an even more eldritch aspect. Great fissures, like wounds in ancient stone, gaped open, and within them, the writhing forms that Martha had glimpsed now appeared with sickening clarity, not mere parasites, but things of amorphous, viscous flesh, pulsing with a faint, internal phosphorescence, like gelid, light-starved organs. Their movements were slow, deliberate, a rhythmic undulation that seemed to draw the very essence of the water into their malformed bodies. The internal gloom deepened, the cabin lights dimming to a sickly orange, and the icy mist upon the viewport thickened, rendering the monstrous exterior a blur of unimaginable dread. Cicero, his earlier, frantic pacing abandoned, now huddled beneath Martha's console, a tight ball of obsidian fur, emitting a low, continuous moan that was more akin to a whimper, a sound of profound animalistic terror. His luminous eyes, twin emeralds in the encroaching darkness, were fixed upon the impenetrable murk beyond the glass, as if he perceived some further greater horror obscured from Martha's human sight. A new sound did then make itself known, a scraping, grinding symphony that resonated through the Ranger's very hull, a vast, guttural whisper of stone against metal, the unmistakable sign of imminent contact. Martha braced herself, her knuckles white upon the controls, her mind grappling with the utter helplessness of their plight, a tiny mote of life against an abyssal leviathan of forgotten time. The impact, when it came, was not a violent crash, but a sickening prolonged caress, a vast, grinding embrace that shuddered through the entire vessel. The Ranger was caught, held fast against the colossal, uneven surface of the monstrosity, its hull groaning under the immense friction. The exterior view, now almost entirely obscured by the viscous growths that smeared the viewport, offered only fleeting, dreadful glimpses of the things that crawled upon the outer shell of the ancient structure. They were slug-like, yet possessed of myriad, chitinous legs that clicked and scraped with a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of silence. One such creature, larger than the rest, did then press itself against the viewport, its form a mottled, bloated sack of greyish-green, its single, unblinking eye like a pool of stagnant oil staring directly into Martha's own. A thin, corrosive liquid began to seep from the edges of its body, dissolving the mist upon the glass, revealing the true, terrible depth of its blank, unholy gaze. A cold, metallic scent, like ancient, stagnant blood, began to permeate the cabin, filling Martha's lungs with the taste of pure, unadulterated dread. Cicero, with a sudden desperate yowl, launched himself from beneath the console, scratching wildly at the viewport, his tiny claws skittering uselessly against the thick, impervious glass, a futile, primal scream against the encroaching nightmare. The unblinking, oil-slick eye of the abyssal slug, thing pressed against the viewport, its silent, ancient gaze a direct assault upon Martha King's sanity. The corrosive liquid, a vile ichor of unknown composition, now spread across the thick glass, obscuring the peripheral view, yet sharpening the terrible focus upon that single, alien orb. A faint, sickening warmth radiated from the creature's body, seeping through the viewport's immense thickness, a subtle but profound violation of the ranger's sealed environment. The metallic scent, like the forgotten tang of rusted iron and stagnant blood, grew stronger, invading Martha's very lungs, a taste of profound decay upon her tongue. Cicero, in his desperate, futile attack upon the glass, had ceased his yowling, now only a choked, guttural rasp issuing from his throat, his small body trembling violently, every muscle taut with a fear that transcended mere animal instinct. A premonition of cosmic horror. Martha, her breath a ragged thing in her chest, found her gaze drawn to the seams of the creature's vast, unholy eye, where minute, thread-like filaments of a darker, almost obsidian hue did pulse with an internal, sickening rhythm. These were not veins, but something far more dreadful, like tiny, living anchors burrowing into the very substance of the creature's being. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the cabin, not from the external pressure but from within the ranger itself, a sound of stressed metal giving way. A fine, glittering dust like powdered mica began to drift from the ceiling panels, and the cabin lights already dim flickered once more, threatening to plunge them into absolute, terrifying darkness. The grinding embrace of the colossal structure outside intensified, a vast, patient force working to subsume the submersible into its own blighted form. With a final, desperate surge of will, Martha attempted to activate the ranger's external manipulators, a pair of powerful robotic arms designed for sampling and repair. Perhaps, she reasoned in a flash of frantic hope, she could dislodge the clinging horror or push away from the encroaching mass. But the controls remained unresponsive, the sophisticated hydraulics utterly inert, as if the very lifeblood had been drained from the machine. The structure, alive in some unholy, unimaginable sense, was not merely holding them, it was disabling them, consuming their functionality with a silent, terrible hunger. The slug thing at the viewport, as if sensing Martha's futile attempt, shifted its immense weight, and a new, larger crack spider webbed across the glass, directly beneath its unblinking eye. A minute, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ranger, and from the depths of the console, a faint, almost musical hum began, a sound that was not of the ranger's making, but seemed to emanate from the very depths of the abyssal rock, a siren song of the void, drawing them deeper into an ancient, liquid tomb. Cicero, with a final choked cry, suddenly collapsed, his body rigid, his luminous eyes staring blankly at the spider-webbed viewport, a silent testament to a terror too great for flesh to bear. The sudden, silent collapse of Cicero struck Martha King with a force more profound than any external impact. The small, rigid form of her companion, his unblinking emerald eyes fixed upon the fractured viewport, was a stark, chilling testament to the overwhelming dread that had finally breached the ranger's protective shell. A cold, hollow ache settled in Martha's chest, a profound sense of isolation deepening the already crushing weight of the abyssal dark. The slug thing outside remained, its single, dead eye staring, the spider, web crack in the viewport, now a prominent, horrifying flaw in their last defense. The faint, musical hum from the console intensified, resonating not just through the metal, but through Martha's very bones, a sound that seemed to bypass her ears and vibrate directly within her skull, a melody of unimaginable antiquity and malevolence. The air in the cabin grew thick, not just with the metallic scent of decay, but with a new, cloying sweetness, like overripe, forgotten fruit, mingled with a saline tang that burned the back of her throat. It was a smell of dissolution, of things unmaking themselves. From the periphery of her vision, along the edges of the console, a faint bioluminescent shimmer began to manifest, tiny motes of pale green light, like abyssal plankton, coalescing into swirling patterns that pulsed in sync with the dreadful hum. They were not internal lights, but seemed to seep from the very substance of the ranger's interior, as if the vessel itself was beginning to weep light. Martha, transfixed by this unholy luminescence, felt a strange lassitude begin to creep into her limbs, a heavy, dreamlike sensation that threatened to drag her into the encroaching oblivion. The crack in the viewport widened, a thin, almost invisible fissure extending from the spider webbed towards the frame, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine, like tortured metal. The slug thing outside shifted, its vast, mottled body seeming to ripple with an internal current, its obsidian eye dilating slightly, as if in recognition or perhaps anticipation. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, it began to withdraw, peeling itself from the viewport with a wet, sucking sound that resonated through the hull, leaving behind a slick, iridescent residue that gleamed faintly in the dimming cabin lights. As it retreated, its monstrous bulk revealing the greater horror beyond, Martha saw that the colossal structure was not merely an inert mass. Great, gaping orifices, like the mouths of impossible ancient mollusks, now revealed themselves within its surface, each ringed with teeth, like protrusions that pulsed with the same pale green light. And from within these abyssal maws, a slow, deliberate exudation began, a thick, viscous fluid, darker than the deepest ink, that bled into the water, swirling outwards like a suffocating cloud, an unholy blood from a dying world. The ranger, with a final, shuddering groan, was drawn inexorably closer to one of these gaping portals, as if being swallowed by the very stomach of the deep. The gaping maw, a rent in the colossal structure's flesh, swallowed the ranger with a dreadful, unhurried grace, the thick, inky fluid that exuded from its depths closing around the submersible like the folds of some monstrous, internal organ. The transition was seamless, a passage from one abyssal horror to another, yet profoundly different. The external pressure, once a palpable, crushing force, now seemed to equalize, replaced by a suffocating internal weight that pressed against the hull from all directions, a pervasive, sickening embrace. The air within the cabin, already tainted, grew heavier, the sweetness of decay now dominant, mingled with an acrid, mineral tang that scraped at Martha King's throat. The bioluminescent motes, those pale green effusions, multiplied, swirling and eddying within the cabin, casting a spectral, shifting light upon the controls and upon the motionless form of Cicero, whose rigid body lay like a forgotten shadow beneath the console. His emerald eyes still fixed, in death or unconsciousness, upon the fractured viewport. The interior of the Leviathan was a universe, unto itself, a vast echoing cavern of unimaginable scale, yet claustrophobically close. The ranger, now devoid of external thrust, drifted listlessly within a medium that was not quite water, nor quite gas, but a viscous, semi-liquid atmosphere that seemed to cling to the hull, muffling all sound save for the persistent low hum that still resonated from the console, a constant, insidious vibration. Walls of colossal, columnar growths, like the petrified sinews of some ancient titanic beast, rose into the unseen heights above, their surfaces slick with the same inky exudation, adorned with further, more monstrous iterations of the pulsating, viscous organisms Martha had glimpsed outside. These internal horrors, however, were larger, their amorphous forms draped like grotesque tapestries, their internal phosphorescence casting a sickly moving luminescence upon the cavern walls, revealing glimpses of vast, silent chambers stretching into the impenetrable gloom. The sense of an ancient, organic architecture, of a living, decaying tomb, was overwhelming. As the ranger rotated slowly, caught in unseen currents within this impossible space, Martha's gaze was drawn to a distant, almost imperceptible light, a faint, rhythmic pulse far within the cavern's depths. It was not the pale green glow of the internal organisms, but a deeper, more profound radiance, a baleful crimson throbbing that beat with the slow, inexorable rhythm of a colossal, suffering heart. It was a beacon of some unholy purpose, drawing them further into the labyrinthine interior of the blighted structure. The hull groaned again, a sound of profound structural fatigue, and a thin, dark fluid identical to the inky medium outside began to weep from the ceiling panels, coalescing into glistening droplets that fell with soft, wet plinks onto the instrument cluster. Threatening to short out the remaining systems, Martha, her limbs heavy with the creeping lassitude, felt a profound, primal terror mingle with a morbid, irresistible curiosity. The ranger was not merely trapped, it was being digested, slowly, irrevocably, by a horror whose true nature remained shrouded in the abyssal gloom, yet whose presence now filled every cubic inch of her dying world. The crimson throb, a baleful heart, light in the abyssal stomach of the colossal entity, pulsed with an hypnotic, malevolent rhythm, drawing the ranger deeper into the viscous, semi-liquid atmosphere. The vessel, now a mere mote adrift, responded to no command, its systems faltering and failing with a mournful finality. The internal lights, already dim, guttered and died, plunging the cabin into a near-absolute darkness, relieved only by the swirling pale green bioluminescence of the motes and the distant infernal glow. The air, thick with the cloying sweetness of decay and the acrid tang of minerals, now carried a faint, whispering sound, a vast guttural sigh that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the living cavern, a sound of immense, ancient agony, or perhaps profound, unholy satisfaction. Martha King, now fully succumbed to the heavy lassitude, found herself slumped against the console, her gaze fixed upon the distant crimson pulse. Her body felt alien, heavy, and unresponsive, as if the viscous atmosphere had begun to permeate her very flesh, dissolving her will. The low hum, emanating still from the console, intensified no longer a mere vibration, but a resonant chord of unimaginable complexity, a language spoken in frequencies beyond human comprehension, yet understood by some nascent primal part of her being. Images, fleeting and terrible, began to flicker at the edges of her mind. Vast, cyclopean structures submerged in ancient seas, impossible geometries of a forgotten epoch, and the slow, inexorable rise of something immense and blighted from the primordial ooze. These were not memories, but intrusions, echoes from the abyssal entity itself, seeping into her consciousness. The Ranger, as if guided by an unseen hand, began to accelerate, albeit slowly, towards the crimson light. The columnar growths that formed the cavern walls loomed closer, revealing their true horrific texture, not petrified sinews but fibrous, fleshy stalks, each one pulsating with an internal sickening rhythm, like the engorged veins of a dying god. Adorned upon these stalks were clusters of the amorphous, viscous organisms, larger now their pale green phosphorescence, illuminating intricate patterns of decay and rebirth upon their surfaces, like glyphs etched in living putrefaction. The dark, inky fluid that wept from the ceiling panels increased its flow, coating the viewport with a thick opaque film, obscuring any direct view of the accelerating passage. Yet, through the swirling motes of bioluminescence within the cabin, Martha could still perceive the distant, crimson heart light, growing ever larger, ever more intense, its rhythm now beating in sync with the dreadful hum from the console, and terrifyingly with the slow, sluggish beat of her own failing heart. Cicero, beneath the console, remained a silent, unmoving shadow, a stark reminder of the fragile line between life and the encroaching oblivion. A line Martha felt herself rapidly crossing. The whispers grew louder, clearer, coalescing into a chorus of unearthly voices, ancient and vast, speaking of dissolution and profound, cosmic hunger. The chorus of unearthly voices, a vast, guttural whisper composed of ancient, liquid syllables, now filled the cabin, resonating directly within Martha King's skull, bypassing her ears entirely. It was a symphony of cosmic hunger, a lament for forgotten eons, and a terrible promise of dissolution. The crimson heartlight, a baleful sun in this abyssal stomach, pulsed with an almost blinding intensity, its rhythm now dictating the very beat of Martha's own failing heart, a slow, inexorable throb that felt both alien and intimately her own. The lassitude that had claimed her limbs now extended to her very thoughts, blurring the edges of reality, twisting her perceptions into grotesque, hallucinatory forms. The air, thick with the unholy miasma, now seemed to shimmer with unseen energies, manifesting as fleeting, shadowy shapes that danced at the periphery of her vision, amorphous entities composed of pure, abyssal terror. The Ranger, a vessel of exploration transformed into a sacrificial offering, continued its relentless acceleration towards the crimson beacon. The inky fluid coating the viewport thickened further, rendering the outside world a blurred, featureless canvas of impenetrable black. Yet the internal bioluminescence intensified, swirling into intricate, geometric patterns that pulsed and shifted upon the console, upon the walls, and even upon the motionless form of Cicero. These patterns, like living sigils, seemed to writhe with an intelligence both ancient and malevolent, mirroring the strange, cyclopean images that continued to flood Martha's mind, structures of impossible angles, cities of black basalt beneath lightless waves, and vast, tentacled horrors slumbering in primordial depth. She was no longer merely observing, she was being immersed, her consciousness a fragile conduit for the entity's abyssal memories. A new sensation, cold and wet, began to seep into the cabin, not from a breach in the hull, but from within the very air itself, a pervasive dampness that clung to her skin, tasting of salt and grave dirt. It was as if the abyssal entity was weeping, its internal fluids permeating the ranger's sealed environment, dissolving the very notion of a barrier. The low hum, the resonant chord, now swelled to a crescendo, a vibrational roar that threatened to shatter her bones, a sound of immense power and terrible purpose. Then, with a sudden sickening lurch, the ranger ceased its forward motion. It was not a stop, but a docking, a final terrible embrace. The crimson light, now directly before the viewport, expanded, revealing itself not as a single, colossal organ, but as an aperture, a vast, pulsating gateway framed by immense fleshy tendrils that twitched and writhed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. And from within this gateway, from the very heart of the crimson glow, a new shape began to emerge, vast and indistinct, a looming shadow against the awful radiance, something of truly unimaginable scale and horror, pulling itself slowly, inexorably into Martha's dying vision, a final, blasphemous revelation from the deepest abyss. The gateway of crimson light, a pulsatile maw framed by immense fleshy tendrils, now revealed its true horrifying purpose. From its very heart, a shape of unimaginable scale began to emerge, not with violent haste, but with a slow, deliberate majesty, a blasphemous revelation from the deepest abyss. It was not a creature of flesh and bone, nor yet a mere construct, but a living geometric impossibility. A vast, crystalline edifice that defied all terrestrial understanding of form and substance. Its surface, a tapestry of shimmering obsidian and coruscating ruby, pulsed with an inner light that seemed to absorb and refract the very gloom, casting fleeting, prismatic horrors upon the inky fluid that now filled the ranger's cabin to the height of Martha King's knees. The water, cold and viscous, tasted of metallic dissolution, a pervasive grave-dirt tang that burned her lips. The hum, the resonant chord of the abyss, reached a deafening crescendo, a vibrational roar that threatened to tear Martha's very consciousness asunder. The phantom shapes, once peripheral, now coalesced into distinct, semi-transparent entities that drifted through the cabin, their forms shifting and reforming with an agonizing fluidity, their silent, unblinking gazes fixed upon Martha with an ancient, hungry intelligence. They were not mere hallucinations, but emanations, projections of the abyssal entity's vast, unfathomable mind, probing, analyzing, consuming her perceptions. The lassitude that had numbed her limbs was now a profound paralysis, rooting her to the console, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended fear, bordering on a terrible, sublime understanding. Cicero, submerged beneath the rising tide of viscous fluid, remained a silent obsidian form, his once luminous eyes now dull and lifeless, a forgotten sentinel against an encroaching oblivion. As the crystalline edifice extruded itself further from the crimson gateway, its true nature began to unfold with a sickening clarity. It was not singular, but composed of myriad smaller, perfectly aligned structures, each one a miniature replica of the greater horror, interconnected by filaments of pure, living light that pulsed with an internal, malevolent energy. And within the heart of each facet, Martha glimpsed movement, not of things that swam, but of things that toddy-flowed like liquid shadows, coalescing and dissipating with an impossible grace. They were the consciousness of the entity, the collective mind of the abyssal horror, now manifesting its true, terrible form. A final, dreadful realization dawned upon Martha. The ranger was not merely trapped within a leviathan, but within a vast, living engine, a processing mechanism of cosmic proportions, and she, Martha King, was merely the latest, unsuspecting input. The whispers, now a chorus of distinct, sibilant voices, seemed to speak her name, drawing her into a final, inescapable communion with the nightmare of the deep. The fluid in the cabin continued its slow, inexorable rise, promising a drowning far more profound than any terrestrial sea. The viscous fluid, dark as the abyss itself, continued its inexorable ascent within the ranger's cabin, now reaching Martha King's chest, its chilling embrace promising a drowning far more profound than any terrestrial sea. It tasted of metallic dissolution, of ancient grave, dirt, and of something else, something sweet and cloying that spoke of things utterly alien to the living world. The whispers, which had become a chorus of sibilant, unearthly voices, now swelled into a vast resonant tide of thought, a direct communion that bypassed her ears and coursed through her very being. They spoke not in words, but in concepts, in images of unimaginable antiquity, of stars that were once oceans, of cosmic architects who shaped reality from raw thought, and of the slow, patient hunger of the void itself, a hunger now made manifest in the crystalline edifice before her. The colossal structure, fully extruded from the crimson gateway, shimmered with an inner light, a kaleidoscope of obsidian and ruby that shifted with a terrifying liquid grace. It was not merely a form, but a colossal mind, a living lattice of consciousness that now extended tendrils of pure pulsating light into the ranger's cabin, probing Martha's very essence. The spectral, semi-transparent entities that had drifted within the cabin now coalesced, their forms sharpening into vague, columnar shapes that seemed to observe her with a silent, profound scrutiny. They were the entity's thoughts given form, its consciousness made tangible, and they pressed in upon her, their silent presence a weight heavier than the abyssal pressure outside. Martha's paralysis was complete, her body a mere anchor to a consciousness being relentlessly unraveled, assimilated into the greater horror. Cicero, fully submerged beneath the rising inky fluid, was now but a shadow, a memory dissolving in the encroaching darkness. The fluid reached her neck, then her chin, its cold embrace a final, inevitable caress. As her mouth opened, not to scream but to gasp for a last, desperate breath, the liquid poured in, not suffocating her, but instead dissolving the very notion of her breath. It was not water, but a medium of pure thought, of ancient memory that flooded her lungs, her throat, her very brain. Her individual consciousness, Martha King, a fleeting spark against the eternal night, began to fray, to unravel, to disperse. The boundary between her mind and the entity's vast, collective intelligence blurred, then vanished. She became the whispers, the images, the hunger. Her final perception was not of death, but of an unimaginable expansion, a terrible apotheosis into the cosmic mind of the abyssal entity. She was no longer Martha, but a facet of the crystalline horror, a single agonizing thought within its vast, unfeeling consciousness destined to drift in the lightless void, forever processing the echoes of consumed worlds, a part of the engine, a fragment of the ultimate, profound decay. The Ranger, now fully filled with the fluid, a silent, dark tomb, became but another chamber within the Leviathan, its purpose fulfilled, its life extinguished, its final passenger absorbed into the cosmic dream of the deep.